Welcome to the bridge. I'm your host, Chris Morga, and today we have a very, very special guest, a very dear friend of mine who is definitely an up and comer in what she's done from taking her career skill sets and changing them over to revenue generation within her own business and solving problems in a massive, massive way. So, Eve Mailer, thank you so much for being on the show. I couldn't be more excited, as I said before, like a fanboy, talking to you.
Well, it's a great pleasure, my friend. It's nice to be on here with you.
I know it's been too long. We've been waiting around and kind of dancing around, like, when are you going to be on the show? When are you going to be on the show? And finally, we were able to make it happen with both our busy schedules. So I really, really appreciate this.
It is really a pleasure.
Awesome. There's so many different things that I want to jump into with you because just your knowledge set and is everywhere. So, I mean, I could pick your brain for 3.5 hours just on, personal productivity, and how to monetize and things like that. But just for some of the listeners, would you kind of walk through your background so they can get a feel and a flavor of your career path thus far?
Sure. So I have been involved in actually internet standards for a really long time. I helped, for my sins, I helped create XML for any in your audience who may have heard of it. Um, and that sort of got me into the world of digital identity and access management, where standards have kind of outsized importance. And so some of the skills that I had to take on over that time included how to do presentations, how to appeal to different audiences, how to be an influencer in the corporate setting, because standards are actually about working with people who are your counterparts at other companies, and you're not the boss of them, so you have to use persuasion. So a few skills like that, and then ultimately, I was most recently at a company called ForgeRock, where for the last 3 years I was the chief technology officer. So I got some great executive experience through that role.
That's excellent too. I think that's how we met through it. You were just recently a CTO over at Forge Rock, and even just you explaining some of the responsibilities in that role, there's so much involved in that. And then, to your point, communicating effectively to direct reports and other team leaders, there's such a nuance and a science to that, on how people learn and develop and how people get the best out of their work. I love that because it does mirror over into your new endeavors, right? I mean, still the communication strategy around how you deliver your solutions and then also how you talk to partners and people that are investing in the company or people who are reaching out to you to kind of learn about how you can solve for X for them, right? So
Mhm.
there's so much different diverse ways to communicate. And at the C-suite level, is there anything that you could really call out that you've taken with you into your new journey that was paramount for you?
I might say that, uh, I was consumed with technical innovation, and I was consumed with being a thought leader. That's kind of what I was doing in a lot of my career. And you have to focus on much more of the operational component when you get into the C-suite. And it becomes really important to get all of the blocking and tackling right. So
Mhm.
discipline and logistics and attention to detail and numbers really become super, super important, as well as communicating with your peers, with others, with board members in the exact way that they need to hear things. So you have to get a lot more pointed about your communication strategy because, as somebody asked me once, do you want to be right or do you want to be heard?
That's powerful. That really is powerful because we have this kind of drive to always want to be right and always kind of validate, but just being heard, is sometimes more important because you can get so much out that necessarily wouldn't even been brought to the table, if you were just constantly speaking and constantly speaking over things like that. So that's important. For any of the listeners that aren't familiar, can you talk about identity and authorization and things like that, just at a high level to kind of clue people in?
Yeah. So in the industry, we talk about IAM, identity and access management, which rolls up a bunch of things. Most people think of this as, oh, I have to log in to an account to get access to my stuff, whether it's at a bank or some retail e-commerce site. Um, Identity software and access management software is behind the checking that you're you, the authentication, and the authorization piece, which is, okay, we know you're you, but are you allowed to access that thing over there? And this, has a place in our lives everywhere we go digitally, right? When we're an
Hmm.
employee of somewhere, when we are a consumer, if we're a partner of a business, there's an awful lot of that having to become known digitally, you know, and more frequently, that's through biometrics, like we do when we're in person. We look at each other's faces and we recognize each other. So that's happening more and more. So identity and access management is all about kind of the cybersecurity part of keeping people safe while building in the right experience so that they will be efficient as employees and so that they will have a great experience as consumers, as customers.
You mentioned biometrics too, and just in the practical or the physical, and I wonder on the consumer side, would that be akin to Face ID for iPhone, things like that?
Yeah, so that is one very popular species, like Face ID, originally Touch ID
Hmm.
on the iPhone 5S, I think it was, which was, real
I think
revelation.
right, yeah,
So that's a species of biometrics that can be sort of tied to your device as well. So it's kind of this locking in of you, your face with your device. And that's a pretty strong way of assuring that you are who you say you are. And that's
yeah,
being used more and more frequently to back up different services that want to get that assurance, right? So they're
yeah.
leveraging the fact that you can do this on-device biometric check.
That stuff is so fascinating to me because as you know, I'm such an Apple nerd. And I have an iPad Mini that has still Touch ID, and it feels so archaic to me when I look at my iPad Pro and it's just everything, and my phone, it just opens right up when I'm looking at it. That it's amazing how fast we move to just get
Yes.
these things done. Is there a lot of a difference between, let's say, enterprise access controls versus the public ones or the public facing ones? Is there a lot of difference there?
There's some difference, right? So, speaking of who you're the boss of, in the employee context, enterprises will have however many employees, and they can kind of make those employees do things, including have not super great experiences online because it's their job.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, and they need really high assurance, high quality authentication for very sensitive things. Like let's say you're a system administrator who gets access, kind of gets godlike access to certain applications and data, and you want to be sure that that person really is the right admin for the right application. So you need to really crank up the quality of the authentication. And so sometimes they use multiple methods or different methods. Um, they may use a lot of kind of checks for like, did this person just log in from, I don't know, Sri Lanka and then a second later appear in Chicago, things like that. So you can really check that something funny isn't going on. In the consumer world, you can't impose a lot of onerous checks like that. And so what you see more and more often is actually passwordless methods that are nice and lightweight, like it'll send you by text, it'll send you a one-time password. Um, or it'll do, clever things like that are coming up much more in this retail context where you want to buy something? We will make it easy for you to buy something, but we just need you to go through this little loop here first. And we're not going to make you assign a password. We're not going to make you type in a password, which I just love. Typing a password that's complex and secure and long enough on a phone is not fun.
No.
So there's innovation actually coming from the consumer world where, of course, they want to grow their user populations to, millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions. By the way, ChatGPT, the OpenAI
Hmm.
system, onboarded 100 million users in the first couple of months, I believe. So there's
Yeah.
an example of something you'd never do in a business, in an employee context. You wouldn't, for its own sake, want to grow your employee population to 100 million, but you sure do when it's,
Talk about
when you're
headaches.
charging for it.
As you're saying that too, and you mentioned the godlike controls, in my mind, to simplify that in my own mind, I'm thinking of parental controls. If you have an Apple ID where you're the family administrator, what can my 9-year-old see versus what can my 15-year-old see? Versus,
Yes.
where my wife is a sub administrator and things like so I'm kind of putting two and two together. Is that close to the same thing or
Yeah, it absolutely is. In fact, that's one of my favorite use cases because, you're a householder who becomes kind of the admin for the family. And This gets into an area that I know as identity relationship management, IRM. And it's a favorite of a number of us who have sort of seen the way things are going. One by one account management is one way of doing things, but you really unlock a lot of power to control access when it's relationships between you. You have a spousal relationship, a relationship with your kids. You might be caring for an elderly parent who might not be able to do as many things online as they used to, and you have to act on their behalf. Those are relationships that could automatically at some point drive access rules that you impose, or maybe, let's say, a streaming media company would want to impose on the situation, like you're the one who's paying. There's only a limited amount of stuff that people can stream who are in your household, as we know from Netflix having to bear the brunt of once upon a time saying, "Oh, share
Yeah.
your password. Sharing
That's
is caring,"
DRM,
and then
right?
going, "Oh, we're losing money."
Yeah, right. They had so many. I was guilty. I was passing them around like Skittles. But
They
that's
they
DRM,
encouraged
right?
it at
Digital
one
rights
time, and
management.
then it appeared in their SEC report that they were losing money. So, they had to come up with a sort of different strategy, which involved authentication and authorization kind of innovation.
It's amazing when you see how landscapes change based on you're trying to scale and you're trying to get notoriety very quickly. But then as you build out so much more, you've got to start locking things down one by one, but not, upset your customers as well, and
Exactly.
then price increases and things like what a crazy, crazy world, when you
Yeah.
look into that. And that's so interesting to me because like you said, it touches so many different areas. I kind of want to ask a loaded question
Oh,
that
do. Go ahead.
the the kind of security checks and the security protocols that we see on the consumer side, right? I.e., iPhone, Android phone, and things like that. Password keychain or iCloud keychains. In your expertise, do you see those as locked down and as safe as we perceive them to be, or is there some differences there?
Yeah. There I would say the OS or the device platform keychains, they're not bad. They're better than an alternative of, storing them in a random file or an Excel sheet or something like that. Um, they're designed to be a little bit more secure. You can compare and contrast, small differences in whether they really are as secure. And there's a lot of subtleties around kind of password management. Um, but increasingly, we're going to this world, and we're not really all the way there yet. We'll never walk away completely from passwords, but we're going to this world where there's this thing called passkeys. And passkeys are a
I've
little bit
seen
of
this.
extra
Yeah.
magic. And passkeys are the kind of things that, Apple and Google and Microsoft have signed up to support. And passkeys have the magic of it's kind of like breaking your what would have been a password into two. And for people who know about public key infrastructure and public private key pairs, that's kind of, some of the wizardry, but it's basically a pair of strings where you're happy to give away the public half of the string. You have to secrete away the private half of the string. And that private half shouldn't really have to go anywhere. And based on the strength of these kind of cryptographically related pairs of strings, you can start having what's called phishing resistant and passwordless authentication. And that's kind of the holy grail because everybody knows about phishing, where somebody's kind of like
Yeah.
trying to get you to give up your password through, sending you spam email and things like that. That's the devil. That is just really bedeviling cybersecurity organizations because it's just so easy to find, stolen millions upon millions of passwords and then using them.
Hmm.
So that's bad. And if we can
Yeah.
find an easy way, a good user experience way to do the security better, there's a new standard around what's called passkeys. It comes from an organization called FIDO Alliance. And I hear we have a new mutual friend who
We
works at the
do.
FIDO
We
Alliance.
do.
Um,
Yeah. That's
so
interesting.
there's definitely things coming along, and those big tech players are participating because they know the importance of this, and that's going to contribute
Yep.
to its adoption and success.
And I've seen that too. I think at last WWDC for Apple's developer conference, they mentioned Passkey and BMW being a partner to
Ah,
where
interesting.
certain BMW models, you can use your Apple Watch or your iPhone to unlock, start, or lock your vehicle. BMW was one of the first, I think, to kind of jump into that game with them and test it out. But I was using LastPass for, oh my goodness, forever, since their inception almost. And, they had a data breach. And that's when I went to iCloud Keychain, just because I was like, okay, I trust
Mm-hmm.
the systems that I'm using and what Apple's going to deliver to us. So that's why I asked that. It was kind of a selfish question, but,
Yeah.
hopefully other
Well, these
Apple
are,
people.
I hope that everybody in your audience is thinking about these things, whether you're a techie or not a techie, these things are really mattering. In fact, I recently wrote a kind of a white paper on
Saw that.
authentication in the age of Gen AI.
Hmm.
Now that AI can produce voice and video deepfakes that are highly accurate and getting more accurate, by the minute, how do families deal with the prospect of, your son calls you in the middle of the night crying, he's in trouble, he wants you to send him money. You're going to be highly motivated to do it. Is it him? He's on a trip somewhere. These are the things where families are actually deciding on challenge questions to ask each other and challenge words to protect themselves against this happening, because people are having to put a cybersecurity mindset into play for ordinary life now because everybody lives a highly digital life.
Oh man, that really just like the light bulb went off. I love that. Can you mention that again about the challenge words and how can families kind of
Yeah.
implement that with their children?
Yeah, I was calling it treehouse security. Like everybody knows that you're supposed to have a passphrase to get into the treehouse.
I love
um,
that.
and so I was just talking to a bunch of folks, and it was sort of like non-techie parents who were saying, "Oh yeah, I set up challenge words with my kids," and I was like, "That's impressive, actually, because it's a kind of sophistication that you have to have around the dangers of modern connected life, and to be sensitive to that and to educate your kids about it in a way that's really real, and maybe even those elderly parents we were just talking about who might, they're the ones who call upon you to be the administrator of the family
Hmm.
computers.
Yeah. Is deepfakes, I mean, I would assume that there's whole teams that companies have to counteract deepfakes, right? Is it
Yeah,
that large of a problem?
it's huge. I mean,
Really?
in a lot of ways, the phishing that I was just talking about is the aim. Like there's this famous case a couple months ago of poor fellow working at a company in Hong Kong. He's a financial analyst, I think, who was fooled by getting onto a Zoom call with like 12 of his superiors, and all of them were confirming that he really ought to do a series of multi-million dollar transfers of money somewhere. So it was kind of phishing of the usual sort, only it was chock full of multiple video deepfakes. And he got fooled. And so these sorts of things are leading to loss of millions already. Um, so it's absolutely a concern. It's a concern for what's called spear phishing, when you're trying to just get to the CEO of a company because they tend to have higher privileges, speaking of access control within a
Right.
company. So, if you can simulate the CEO's voice or simulate the voice of, trusted confederate of the CEO and trick the CEO, or get a family member of the CEO to give out some personal data that might mean the compromise of the CEO's accounts, like this is very real, and it's getting harder and harder to battle. And this is where, I make some recommendations for the security folks, for the identity folks, in this paper, because we've got to start out innovating and think of big leaps instead of, as I was calling it, like, bots battling bots is not going to be what gets us out of this mess. That's the battle of
That makes
inches
so
that
much
we,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, I saw, I think it was OpenAI had for Chat GPT 40, I think it is.
Yeah,
Like I don't know how
four
they went
four
from 5
O.
to 40.
Yeah, 4O, which stands for Omni.
For Omni? Okay.
Yeah.
I saw the video of where they had the customer service rep and the customer on the two phones talking to one another to, I think, replace someone's phone or something like that. And I'm listening to this and like my mind is just going, "Whoa, this is crazy." And I think Google I/O a couple years ago announced where someone wanted to set up a hair appointment. So the AI within the Google device called up the hair salon, made the appointment, put it into Google Calendar, and I'm thinking to myself, "Wow, it's exciting." Yeah, I mean it's really really incredible. But the bad actors that are using this to, like you said, to do spear phishing on a CEO, be able to gain all access into financials, everything.
Hmm.
It's scary, you
Yeah, the
know?
Gen AI part of AI, giving it free rein to do things without human checks is, in general, not a good idea. There's a species of AI called retrieval augmented generation where you can sort of say what the domain of data is that it's using. And if you know it's a sort of good domain of data, you can ask it to cite all of its sources. And that is a little bit closer to reality, and it can't hallucinate. And those are the kinds of things that might be a good sort of savior of the situation.
And you've written documents and things like this
Yeah, I
about all of
have a
this?
paper specifically on the impacts to authentication, specifically biometric authentication, which was looking like the star of the authentication show a couple of years ago. Oh, it's going to save us from passwords. And we got to be a little bit more clever than that now that AI is sort of running away with all the deep fakes.
Well, that's kind of the story of evolution and iteration on these type of things, right? The idea comes out,
Yeah,
you showcase it publicly as an organization, everybody gets real excited, and then you start thinking through, you had some time to mull it over and you go, "Oh, wait, what about this? Or what about this?" Now all the
yeah.
teams have to come back together and kind of think about that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an arms race. Security is always an arms race, or maybe this is a little bit too cute, but I like to say that there's job security and security because, there's
Makes
bad
sense.
actors, there's good actors, they fight. You get to a new place, you got to keep going.
And there always will be, right? There's always going to be bad actors that take advantage of, the new technologies that are coming out. And I know that for what is it, Black Hat? Is it Black Hat that there's White
Black Hat
Hat,
is
Red
one.
Hat?
Yeah, DEF
Yeah.
CON's another one. These are like the serious conferences. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the things that came out of that, I was watching snippets and everything, and I'm like, wow, this stuff is crazy. And you think back, for those of us that are old enough to kind of remember, I was looking at the advancements of AI and even in the security and everything, and I'm going, this feels familiar to me. And I think back to 1993 when the internet was kind of wide, everybody was sending those Netscape discs in your mail, and you would go onto the internet, and everybody was all, the jobs are gone, and
Yeah.
this feels very similar. But look at how I think there was something about like 16 million new jobs that spawned out within the first 7 years based off the internet. So I'm curious as to, with the new security advancements, with the AI advancements, and how many jobs are going to be created versus the jobs that go away, because things are done differently. So that's where it seems very familiar to me. So I don't get all up in arms about it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like, if it tends to be the case that drudgery and toil can be mitigated by a lot of these tools. And who doesn't want that? It enables us
Yeah.
to put more of our own unique smarts to, new versions of job opportunities or businesses. Probably there's going to be a whole new field of different kinds of apps that are tuned to specific purposes. There's a futurist named Benedict Evans who is constantly asking this very important question. I feel about is AI just going to generally change things by being a general thing, or is it going to lead to just thousands and millions of new applications that do specific things, which people are going to have to think up? And I'm hanging on to, maybe it's a thin read, but I'm hanging on to that because, people do need to think up the things that people want and businesses
Mhm.
want and satisfy those needs. And that's kind of the exciting part of hanging up my own shingle right now
Yeah. And
is that imperative.
for the, I'm trying to think of the right way to word this question. I never can come out with that. For the people that, um, on the consumer level, and when it comes to security and identification, right? What I think of is these AI tools, and I don't know if this is true or not. Maybe a lot of people were creating these customized models out of AI. Let's say ChatGPT or Copilot, or I forget
Yeah.
Google's version of it, Gemini. Well, one of the things I had heard is in the initial interaction that you have between this, you almost have to train the AI based on your email address, right? That's where the access comes into your specific account. But you have to go through this almost 2 to 3 paragraph introduction and then ask at the end of it to pin this for future reference. Is
Mm.
that safe to do that? I mean, it is tied to your email. So theoretically, your email security controls or your account controls through that. should protect against that. But allowing that much information around who you are, what you do, and some of those personal things, do you recommend that, or do you think that's kind of a foolish error in this
I
stage?
mean, there's a couple different perspectives you can have on this. For one, if it's business sensitive data, if it's like trade secrets or something, you absolutely need to be careful about that. And that's where a kind of enterprise account and an agreement with, say, Google makes all the difference as to what their rights are around licensing use of the data that you're uploading. In terms of personal information, PII, personally identifiable information, um, there's a couple different ways you can think about it. One is the completely cynical take that it's all already out there anyway. Like in the research that I've been assembling for a talk that I'll be giving in a couple of weeks, there's a thing called the European Identity and Cloud Conference, and I chose to sign up to do a keynote called "Consent is Dead." Um, and
It's so
speaking of
true.
cynical, and so the cynical view is like it's all already out there, and you are identified 6 ways from Sunday by these systems that you don't necessarily interact directly with. And of course, AI has this hunger for data so that it can, it can get its models trained. And so, from one perspective, it probably knows all that stuff about you, and it depends on what it's going to do about it. How that's going to impact your life. Um, the less cynical take is uh, I'm one of those weird people who does read privacy policies, and I actually tried to write a good one for my own website. I have the luxury of, being able to be quite pure about it. Um, and it behooves you to be sensitive to what the ground rules are for what they say they're going to do. Like there's been a sort of an outcry for anybody who hangs out in Slack workspaces lately because Slack went around saying, hey, we're going to be training our AI models on the data in your workspace, and you have to opt out at a workspace level in order not to have that happen. So, all the administrators of all the Slack
Interesting.
spaces I'm in have been going around going, okay, we went and opted out, but like, okay, that's the choice that they made. And you have to consider you don't want to have to watch your words in every online space that you're in. And I don't think people
Yeah.
will. I think there's a truth about human nature and about organizational nature that means those things are going to be shared. So it behooves people to, at the margin, pay attention to the differences between the systems, between the applications, and what they say they're going to do, and maybe make decisions based on that.
So
But a
key
lot of it is already out
takeaway.
there.
Yeah. So key takeaway, read those policies,
Yeah,
when you get a
I'm
chance to.
sorry to say yes, or
I
have
mean,
your
that's
lawyer read
important.
them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is important. When I had to put my privacy policy up on my website, I was reading through it. And there was a few times where, your eyes get heavy because you're like, oh boy.
Oh yeah.
But then when you start going a little further and reading, especially about the sale of information and how they potentially share versus sell. I shouldn't have said that, but they share certain
Yes.
information with third-party vendors. Um, that becomes very interesting because immediately your red flag comes up, right? And you start
Hmm.
going, well, wait a minute. Why don't I have visibility into who these third-party vendors are? Where did
Hmm.
they come from? Who are their investors? Like, how can I deep dive 50 levels down just so I can understand how to protect myself? That stuff's not in
Yes.
there,
That
so
is, you're absolutely right.
yeah.
Like you've hit the nail so completely on the head about the challenge with these third parties. And in fact, so my understanding is I'm on the board of an organization called Internet Safety Labs, which has this amazing thing called the App Microscope, where it's done a deep dive on a whole bunch of online services. It's not just about cookies. I know everybody hates cookies because of all the cookie notices and everything.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways in which they're making these calls out to third parties. And I believe that in California anyway, that whole do not sell my data thing in the California privacy law,
Hmm.
I believe that sharing data counts as selling data. And if that's the case, anytime you see some sort of, oh, we have this place you can turn off, or, say do not sell, um, it's an indication that they're for certain sharing your data.
Yeah. Well, that's where I got that from too, because I had read through some of that, very topical. Yeah. And I was going, wait a minute, this sounds very sinister in a sense, where you're supposed to feel comfortable that here's this documentation, you can read it for yourself. It'll make you feel a bit more comfortable for opting into what we do. But when you read it, you feel a little bit more closed in and a little bit more fearful as you get
Yes.
deeper into it. So
And
that's
if it's
incredible.
and if it's a big kind of networked online service of whatever kind, like the social
Mhm.
networks, um, or if it's just like the big player in the space, you kind of feel like you're over a barrel. You kind of have to agree, right? It's
Yeah.
not. This is why I say consent is dead. That's another reason why think consent is dead. Is asking you anything at the point of service is not a way of empowering you. Sorry, it's just not.
No, and it's so great because in my mind, and I hope this isn't like a hot take type of thing, but in my mind, I always think to myself, if I'm going to jump onto a social platform and I'm going to allow Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever, to be able to sell my information, then how do I monetize so I can counteract that? So if you're making
Mm,
money off of my information, why can't I? So I
mhm.
was always a proponent of monetizing your skills and what you've learned because you spend so many hours in learning so many things working for a corporation that in the event you decide to hang up your own shingle and do your own thing, why not be able to monetize in every way, shape, or form that everybody else is off of my information?
And this is something I learned from you, actually, is, it's great, it's appropriate, it's very important for your business to have the proper LinkedIn presence.
Hmm.
If you're 100% dependent on LinkedIn, tell me if I'm saying it right, you've got a sort of single point of failure, and you
Yeah.
really need to build a separate presence. And, that was something that it took me 3, 4, 5 months to do in my journey as a small consultancy, but I made sure to do it because that resonates very deeply with me.
Hmm.
In the identity world, there's a big conversation going on around how to try and decentralize identity.
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough to do. It's a whole other architecture. But there's some people who are highly motivated to do it that way, and those people tend to be privacy sensitive. So,
Yeah. And I'm glad
yeah.
you brought that up too, because we were just talking about LinkedIn and something new that I learned about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an excellent platform for what it does, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
the operative phrase for what it does. B2B platform to be able to sell, to be able to network, communicate. But the one key piece that I think a lot of us, including myself, I had to learn this over time, it is a repository. That's
Mm.
the big word. It's a repository. But LinkedIn does want to help its users and they're fantastic for it. So they added little window where you can lead people off their site to something that you're
Mm.
promoting. And I found this out recently that your featured section was LinkedIn basically saying, okay, if you want to lead people away from the platform, here's the one area that you can showcase your work and
Huh.
your skills, and you put it up here, and you're allowed to lead people away from to go to your white paper on your website or go to your YouTube channel, things like that. Because we do it in a post every single day. And I wanted to test this. So the episode of The Bridge that came out this morning, I put in the comments, the YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and I noticed that the engagement was much lower than it normally is.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Funny about that.
Right. So then you put it up into the featured section where I have the cover art to the bridge and it leads over to the podcast page. All of a sudden, I went into the back part of the analytics on Kajabi, which is the site that I use or the platform that I use, spikes everywhere. I was
Huh.
like, oh, so then I realized I was, and part of you wants to go, well, thanks a lot, Microsoft or LinkedIn and everything. But then you also think like, okay, I get it. You're an incredible platform and none of us would have been able to have the opportunities that we do have without that platform. It is a fantastic, I'm a huge fan. But there's almost that point where you say, well, thanks for that, and giving me that one little window, but then you also do have to say, thank you for that because that is helpful. It
So
drives
yeah,
business towards
that
that.
insight, yeah, it's huge. And this gets into something I've been having this conversation with folks actually on LinkedIn about, which is when it comes to privacy policies, I chose Substack for writing blog posts, and I wrote a post about my writing of my
Good
privacy
choice.
policy years ago. I had sort of understood the formulation of what how you pay for using any online service. There's you always pay. You always pay, and you might pay in some combination of money, attention, like ad watching, seeing whatever comes through the feed, and your personal data. It's some
Hmm.
combination of those. And if privacy policies would just say, here's how we make money, here's what you're paying, that amount of transparency would enable you to build a much better, more understanding relationship. Because this insight that you've just brought up, I mean, that's gold right there, is understanding that the relationship with LinkedIn means they give you that little window. Like, okay, I understand. I enjoy engaging. I get value out of engaging. Here are the constraints, just like they say, property is a bundle of sticks. You can own your
Hmm.
house, but you can't make noise after 10 p.m., whatever. Okay, so you can engage on LinkedIn. If you want to lead people away from LinkedIn, the deal is
Yeah.
do it here and do it in
Yeah.
this way.
And you got to be thankful because the featured section, I think, is new. I think 2022 or 23 that came out. So it is new. So you're grateful for it because I'm not the owner of LinkedIn. Otherwise, I'd say, yeah, do what you want, but you're grateful for it. But it is also something that, especially job seekers, kind of tying back to what I do, right? Job seekers that are trying to generate people to go elsewhere to say, oh, all this portfolio stuff that I've done, check it out and go here. But LinkedIn's like, no, you can't do that, but you can do it in the feature section. And there's so much of an onus on, well, maybe onus is the wrong word, but there's so much of a dependency on LinkedIn is that one source of getting a job.
Hmm.
Indeed has kind of fallen off. Their market share has fallen off at Career Builder,
Hmm.
all of them, because LinkedIn is the place. But to your point, that communication is so important to give people the information they need to be successful. Because we could
Yes.
put it up in a post and say, you're going to be successful this week and everything's going to be great and grand and wonderful. That's not helpful. Makes me feel good. Yeah, appreciate it. Could have a down day, but it makes me feel. But that communication, to your point, is just saying, here's how you can drive people away to the platform, and here's how we use the platform to increase our business. I don't know why communication is still such a problem. I don't get it.
I would like it to be more transparent, and then people will just roll with it and adapt faster. And considering that a whole bunch of us are paying LinkedIn customers, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's worth
So
it.
I
I
do
mean,
pay in money
yeah, and I
and
mean, I don't
data.
want people to take away, that it's a negative on it because I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. I love it since day one. I've been on that platform. And it just makes me think too when we were talking about that because I always tell my son too that if something is free, you're the product.
Yes.
I tell him that all the time. If something
Well,
is
and this
free,
is the
you're the
lesson of
product.
this notion of like, okay, nothing actually is free. If you are the product, and that means you're paying in data and attention, right? They're
Hmm.
getting money. It's a multi-sided market for them. They're using you as a kind of a partner, um, rather than a customer.
Yeah,
And people need to know this, and I think they're starting to understand this with a higher degree of sophistication, just like they're starting to understand the weaknesses of passwords with a higher degree
yeah.
of sophistication.
And
You
look at
know.
the roll on too. I mean, YouTube increased tremendously this past year because of the idea of freely being able to monetize and YouTube saying, okay, just put up the videos, get people to watch your videos, and we'll pay you a portion. And people are starting to realize, why am I spending my time on Facebook or why am I spending my time? There's a lot of people that are starting YouTube channels now, me included, but it's, I think if we were to go to a monetization, we totally got off security and identity. I'm sorry. But
It
if
relates to
we,
identity, though.
it does, it always goes back.
The other part of identity.
But the people that, I think people are saying, I would love to be able to be paid for my time in creation and things like that. And I think LinkedIn is probably working out a monetization model for the general public, but it's not there yet. And I think to your point, a lot of people are getting smart about it and saying, well, I don't know, is my time really worth me going every morning and putting up a LinkedIn post to increase engagement or to try and drive business? Is it worth it? And am I getting a fair value back in it? Probably not, you know. But to kind of pivot over, we talked about the consumer side of things. I want to talk a little bit about enterprise. I mean, at your level and the things that you've probably forgotten that I'll never know. you know, what are some of the takeaways or what are some of the key points of interest that enterprises should take away, or if there's executive leadership in major companies that listen to the show. I mean, how do you serve, or how do you help them to really get a grip on this whole thing?
Well, there's a specialty that I seem to have, which is really getting people to up-level their thinking around the role of identity in their organizations. So for a lot of people, in their consumer lives, identity sort of zooms down into the login box that you experience.
Hmm.
And thinking about identity as a login box when you are responsible for overseeing any part of identity in your organization or using some of that information to keep yourself secure, to give your people a better experience, it's actually dangerous to think of identity as a login box. So what I like to say about Venn Factory is that I help people with strategic advisory that enables them to develop irresistible identity strategies. And the reason I put it that way is that identity needs to infuse really every part of your organization. And everything is digital now, everything is connected now. It's almost like identity becomes the cardiovascular system. It's carrying the important information that you need to know to give
I love
anybody any
that.
experience at all. To give a threat actor, the bad experience of getting kicked out or identified or, led to a honeypot so that you can observe their actions. So in security ways, in privacy ways, in experience ways, in innovation ways, it's really quite important to see how big and almost diffuse identity needs to be in an organization. It has a lot of stakeholders. So it means that it's one of these shared services that has to be sort of orchestrated carefully internally in an organization. But if you have the right conception of it, if you have the right conception of how it can help you, how it can help your customers, how it can help, probably your army of developers, then now you're really talking about up leveling. You're really talking about 10x improvements, 100x improvements on all of these areas of your business: privacy, security, innovation, experience.
That's huge. And you did that so beautifully. And I want to apologize for doing that. That's just the recruiter in me. I always do, on all my interviews, I've always had a great time and talk it. And then I always pivot to the kind of elevator pitch just to see if they've already nailed it. And you just did. So that was
Well, you
beautifully done.
prepared me well, didn't you, Chris? Months ago, you prepared me when I
I
was
know,
learning from you
disclaimer.
at your feet.
Right? We got to put a disclaimer. Eve was a client of mine and she did fantastically well, even beyond expectations. So you made
Oh,
me look horrible.
that's kind.
No, I'm kidding. No, this is so much fun, Eve. And I'm sure we could I want to be cognizant and respectful of your time. But can you share with some of the listeners where they can find you and where they can really kind of dive into what you've been doing and how you've been really changing the game in this? Because just your insights are incredible. And I love talking to you for that reason.
Appreciate that so much. I mean, if you want to go straight to the source, VennFactory.com, Venn diagrams. Who doesn't love a Venn diagram? I love them especially. So come see me over there, introduce yourself. You can get that paper that I mentioned about kind of authentication versus AI. It should hopefully be readable by just about anybody. It doesn't rely on any special expertise. And yeah, hope to meet people over there.
That's great. And you have a LinkedIn profile as well, right?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
If people mention that they heard us talking and want to introduce themselves, happy to connect.
Yeah, and you are so approachable. I mean, you look at your past, and I know that some people might get intimidated. They see a past like yours and go, "No, I don't want to reach out to." But you are so approachable. You're so loving. You're just such a wonderful people person that I can only see the sky isn't the limit in your case. I mean, you're going to the stratosphere, and I can't wait to see it.
Ooh, astronautics. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's a very kind thing to say.
Well, thank you so much, Eve, for being on the show, and I'll catch you all on the next one.
Thanks for the opportunity to be on the bridge.